You break because you're trying to stay whole. Every time life shatters you, it's because you're clinging to a version of yourself that needs to die. Carl Jung discovered something that changes everything about human suffering. What you call breaking is actually breaking open, and the pain you're running from is the birth canal of who you're meant to become. You're not fragile. You're resisting your own transformation so hard that life has to break your resistance with what feels like catastrophe. Jung understood that every breakdown is a breakthrough in disguise. That relationship that destroyed you, it broke an identity that was keeping you small. That career failure that crushed you, it shattered a path that was never yours. That loss that devastated you, it cracked open a shell you'd outgrown. You're not breaking down. You're breaking through layers of false self that have become prison walls. Here's the truth that will stop you from breaking. You are not your ego. The thing that breaks isn't you. It's a psychological structure you've mistaken for yourself. Your ego, your persona, your carefully constructed identity, these can shatter. But what Jung called the self, your true, whole nature, cannot be broken. It can only be revealed through the breaking of everything false. I watched a woman go through what she called complete destruction. Divorce, bankruptcy, death of a parent, illness, all within 1 year. She said she was broken beyond repair, but Jung would say she was being freed. Every external structure that defined her was removed so she could finally discover who she was beneath all the roles, achievements, and relationships. The breaking wasn't destruction. It was liberation. The ego creates what Jung called provisional life, a temporary structure built from others' expectations, social roles, and survival strategies. This structure feels like you, but it's actually a scaffold that's meant to be temporary. When life starts breaking this scaffold, your ego experiences it as death, but your self knows it as birth. The terror you feel isn't real danger. It's your ego recognizing its mortality. You break when you resist what Jung called legitimate suffering. There's suffering that comes from resisting reality, and suffering that comes from accepting it. The first type breaks you because you're fighting the universe. The second transforms you because you're flowing with it. Most people spend their lives in the first type, breaking themselves against reality's walls. Here's what's revolutionary. The things that break you are specifically designed to break you. Not by some cruel god, but by your own psyche. Jung discovered that the self, your totality, creates situations that force ego death when the ego won't voluntarily surrender. Your unconscious conspires with external reality to shatter whatever is keeping you from wholeness. That person who betrayed you. They were cast in that role by your psyche to break your naive trust so wisdom could emerge. That failure that humiliated you? It was orchestrated to break your false pride so genuine confidence could develop. That loss that emptied you. It was designed to break your attachments so freedom could be born. I knew a man who built his entire identity on being a provider. When chronic illness made him unable to work, he thought he was broken. But Jung would see that his psyche was breaking the limiting belief that his worth came from productivity. He had to be broken as a provider to be born as a human being. The illness wasn't the enemy, the identity was. The shadow holds the key to becoming unbreakable. Everything you've rejected about yourself, everything you've hidden in shadow, is actually strength you've disowned. You break because you're operating at half capacity, using only your acceptable qualities. But when you integrate your shadow, your anger, selfishness, wildness, you become psychologically anti-fragile. The fear of breaking keeps you fragile. You're so afraid of falling apart that you hold yourself together with exhausting tension. But Jung knew that this tension is what makes you brittle. The person who can fall apart and come back together is infinitely stronger than the person desperately maintaining form. Water is harder to break than ice because it doesn't resist its own transformation. Here's the truth about your breaking points. They're not weaknesses. They're growth edges. Every place you tend to break is where you're meant to expand. Relationships always break you the same way? That's where you need to grow. Career situations always shatter you similarly? That's your development edge. The pattern of your breaking is the map to your becoming. Jung's concept of enantiodromia, things turning into their opposite, explains why breaking leads to strength. The more you resist breaking, the more brittle you become. But when you allow yourself to break, you become fluid. The most broken people often become the strongest because they've learned to reassemble themselves consciously rather than desperately maintaining unconscious structures. You think you break because you're weak, but you actually break because you're too rigid. You've confused strength with hardness, stability with stasis, security with stagnation. Real strength is flexibility. Real stability is dynamic balance. Real security is knowing you can handle transformation. The bamboo survives the storm that breaks the oak because it bends without breaking. Relationships break you because you enter them as half a person seeking completion. When the other person can't complete you, because that's impossible, you break. Jung understood that relationships aren't meant to complete you, but to show you where you're incomplete. The breaking isn't failure. It's revelation of what you need to develop within yourself. I watched a couple destroy each other, trying not to break. They maintained their relationship roles perfectly. He, the strong provider, she, the nurturing caretaker. But their shadows were starving. His need for nurturing, her need for strength, both denied, both projected, both turning toxic. They needed to break their roles to find wholeness, but they chose breaking each other instead. The midlife crisis is programmed breaking. Jung saw that around life's midpoint, the psyche deliberately breaks the first half of life's structures. The identity that got you this far won't take you further. The ego achievements, the social success, the established persona, all must break for the second half of life's task. Individuation, becoming who you truly are beyond all roles. Your symptoms are trying to break you open, not break you down. Depression is trying to break your false positivity. Anxiety is trying to break your false control. Addiction is trying to break your false sobriety. The symptom isn't the problem. It's the solution to a problem you don't know you have. It's trying to break what needs breaking so something real can emerge. Dreams show you what needs to break. Recurring dreams especially, they're pointing to structures that are overdue for demolition. The house that keeps crumbling in your dreams, that's a psychological structure ready to fall. The death dreams, that's ego death being requested. The falling dreams, that's the invitation to let go of control. Here's what makes you unbreakable. Accepting that you're always breaking and reforming. You're not a solid object that can shatter. You're a process that's constantly dying and being reborn. Every cell in your body replaces itself. Every thought is temporary. Every feeling passes. You're not a thing that can break. You're a flow that can be disrupted, but never destroyed. The people who never seem to break have a secret. They're constantly allowing micro breaks. They let small parts of themselves die daily, instead of waiting for life to force massive demolition. They update their identities regularly, instead of clinging to outdated versions. They practice ego death in small doses, instead of requiring catastrophic intervention. Jung's active imagination technique teaches you to break consciously. Instead of waiting for life to break you, you enter dialogue with the parts of you that need to die. You negotiate with your complexes, your shadows, your outdated identities. You practice breaking apart and coming together in the safety of imagination before life forces it in reality. The religious and mythological traditions all include death and rebirth because it's a psychological necessity. The hero's journey always includes a death, not physical, but psychological. You can't become who you're meant to be while remaining who you've been. Something must break for something new to be born. Here's the practical truth. The next time you feel yourself breaking, don't resist. Lean into it. Ask, what in me needs to die? What identity am I outgrowing? What structure has become a prison? Instead of desperately trying to hold yourself together, become curious about what's trying to emerge through the cracks. The wound is where the light enters, but only if you stop trying to seal it immediately. Your breaking points are actually breaking open points. The catastrophe you're avoiding might be the liberation you're seeking. The death you're fearing might be the birth you're needing. You'll never be broken again once you understand this truth. You were never solid enough to break in the first place. You're a dynamic process pretending to be a fixed thing. You're consciousness playing at being form. You're the ocean pretending to be a wave and then panicking when the wave dissolves. Jung's ultimate insight is that what you call yourself is just a temporary arrangement of psychological energy. It's meant to be fluid, meant to transform, meant to die, and be reborn continuously. Your suffering comes from trying to make permanent what is meant to be temporary. Your breaking comes from resisting the very transformation that would make you whole. The truth that makes you unbreakable is this: embrace breaking as transformation. Welcome dissolution as reorganization. See death as birth. The person who knows they can break apart and reassemble is infinitely stronger than the person desperately maintaining false cohesion. Stop trying not to break. Start breaking consciously. Break your limiting beliefs before life has to break them for you. Break your outdated identities before crisis forces their dissolution. Break your rigid patterns before symptoms emerge to shatter them. You're not broken. You're breaking open. You're not falling apart. You're falling together. You're not dying. You're being born. And once you understand this, really understand it, you'll never be broken again. Because you'll know that every breaking is just transformation wearing a frightening mask. Every ending is a beginning in disguise. And every death of who you were is the birth of who you're becoming. That's Jung's medicine for the breaking. You're not breaking down. You're breaking through. You're not being destroyed. You're being revealed. You're not losing yourself. You're finding yourself beneath all the false structures that needed to break for the real you to emerge. You are unbreakable, not because you're strong, but because you're fluid. Not because you're solid, but because you're conscious. Not because you resist breaking, but because you've learned to break gracefully, consciously, purposefully. You've learned the secret. What breaks was never you anyway. It was just who you thought you had to be. And that person was always meant to die, so the real you could finally live.